Hi readers, welcome back to my channel, Lila Wanders and Reads. Lee here, and welcome to my February reading recap. Looking at these books, I think there are 13 here. I'm not sure if any of them are going to go on down as my favorite of the year. Certainly not any from the last week or so. There is one that could be a contender, but I'm going to have to see how I feel about it further down the road. Anywho, let's get started. Here's what I read this month. I started the month with James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, and although I really didn't like the main character, David, I still remember his name, so that's something. I loved Baldwin's writing. I felt that David's shame and self-loathing made this a difficult read, and I didn't like him. I did not find much, if anything, redeeming in David as a character. But again, I loved Baldwin's writing, and this inspired me to get more James Baldwin's books to read this year. If you've not read this, I do recommend it. It is a love story-ish, told by a selfish prick who really doesn't think about anybody else's feelings but his own. Anywho, I really liked the book, but did not like I said, didn't like David. That still set the month off on a high note, and the next book, the third in Sarah Adams' When Rome, Kentucky series, Beg, Borrow, or Steal, I absolutely adored. In this book, again, this is a third in what I thought was a trilogy, but when I got to this book, I was like, oh no, there's going to be a fourth book. And now I'm sad that I don't have that fourth book right now. I read this book, I think I read the first one in January, the second one in February. Nope. I read the first two in January, and I read the third in February, and the second book in this series is up there as one of my favorite of the year because I had such a good time. These books just keep getting better and better. If you've not read these, I highly recommend them. I think I said I'm sad because the fourth book is not here yet, and it's going to probably be a minute because this just came out. Anywho, great, light, fun read. Not very spicy, but a lot of romance and a lot of tension. The third book that I read, sorry if you hear me dropping these on the floor, I don't have space to put them on my desk. The third book is one that could be a contender for one of my favorites of the year, but I'm just not sure about it. I mean, I loved the book. I'm just not sure if it's going to be a year-long favorite, and that is Eowyn Ivy's Blackwood's Blue Sky. She calls this a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and when I talked about this, I may have added some spoilers in the weekend books when I did that. I won't add them here. Her writing is lyrical, it's beautiful. I can't wait to read more of her. This is her most recent publication. I've got 2 other of her books to read, and I really look forward to reading them now. I love her writing. Victor LaValle's Lone Women was one of my favorite books of 2022 or 2023. I think it was 2022. So I like to space out my authors most of the time, and I waited until now to pick up The Changeling. I knew what Victor LaValle's writing style was, but I guess I had forgotten because I was expecting something more like Colson Whitehead or James Baldwin. This was a fairy tale. And once I adjusted myself to that fact, I was like, okay, it just wasn't what I was expecting going in. This is now a series, I think, on Apple TV, and I lost my remote for my Apple TV, but I figured out how to log into the app on Roku, and so now I may watch this series coming up in the future. But I definitely recommend it if you know going in that it's a fairy tale and don't expect anything outside of that. Sorry, shaking the table. So one of the books that I'm going to mention here isn't in this pile because I just finished it last night, and so technically it's a March read. But within the past month and some change, I've had 3 books that had wolves in them. It started with Jodi Picoult's Lone Wolf. I had a DNF right before this book, and I said I was going to hold myself accountable, and apparently I'm not. I had a DNF, and so I wanted something that I thought was a light read. Well, I guess if you call a man dying and his children arguing about whether to pull the plug or not light, that's what this was. This did drag a little bit about me. This just dragged a little bit for me. I have not had any alcohol. I just can't speak. So the father is the one who's dying. He's injured in an accident. Both the kids have secrets that if they just told at the beginning, I thought it would be a more interesting story. Instead, she strung us along, and that kind of irritated me. But wolves play a heavy part because the father took care of wolves in captivity, and the whole thing is about the pack and really interesting. I learned a lot about wolves from Jodi Picoult's Lone Wolf. Would I read this again? Maybe in a pinch, but no, like I said, some parts of it irritated me a little bit. Next up was a book that I was really excited for. I bought this from Blackwell's in the UK. That is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. I loved most of this book. But again, I kind of got impatient because it started dragging for me a little bit toward the end. And I felt like Lenore just didn't have any control over her life. And maybe she didn't. Maybe that's the point. I just felt by the end, with what she did at the end, it should have ended with her taking control more. Instead, she just seems to be swept along by circumstances. But aside from that, it really was a great retelling of the Carmilla story. I seem to be having problems with endings because I'm not sure how I feel about the ending of Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. Loved this book. That was my first time reading her, but again, I just wasn't so sure about the end. I went back and reread it, and I'm still not 100%. I did love this book. I did not love it as much as Nickel Boys, although there was a similar theme in that of prison and children in prison specifically. Highly recommend this, though. I'm so glad I read it. I'm going to read more by her soon, as soon as I can get my shit together and find all my books. Anywho, next up, I read ahead for our March book club pick, which is not until like the 26th of March, so I have to keep this on hand so I don't forget the book, so I can go bone up on it. I have no tabs in this. This is Kristen Hanna's Magic Hour. I love Kristen Hanna as author. I'm kind of reading her backwards because I think I started, not true. I started reading her at Firefly Lane, and I've picked up a couple others, but The Women is one of my most favorite books of hers. This was published in 2006, and you can see from 2006 to 2024 how her writing has just gotten better and better. This one was just an okay read for me. In my weekend books, I talk about how there's a story between 2 sisters that I would have liked to have seen developed more, and the fact that it could have left the male main love interest out for me, and I thought it would have been better. This book also contained just one wolf, but it was kind of central in the book, in the story, the background. I guess, I'm not sure how she got the wolf. Anywho, not important. Anyway, but so since we're talking about wolves, the third book that contained wolves is called Once There Were Wolves. I will be talking about it in my weekend books next week, and that involved wolf packs as well. So we are now coming to the final week of February. I started that out with I Am Not Your Negro by Raoul Peck and James Baldwin. This is based on the movie that Raoul Peck directed, and it mines Baldwin's work to make up the content of the movie. A lot of this entire book comes from directly from the movie. So if you read this as a standalone, it's going to feel a little disjointed. You don't have the words and images working together like the movie does. However, as a supplement to the movie, highly recommend this. This book sent me down a rabbit hole on Lorraine Hansberry, and now I've got a whole video planned to do about her later in this month, later in March. Somebody else made a comment about this. So it's a very small book, but it's not even, I feel like they should have made it a coffee table book. There's pictures in here. I don't know. I think it would have been great as a coffee table book. But I really enjoyed this. It will not be one of my favorites of the year because it is a supplement to the movie. And had I read it as a standalone, it just would not, it wouldn't have made any sense to me. Okay. Disappointment ahead. This, at our local Barnes & Nobles, they always have a table like TikTok. Saw it on TikTok or something like that. This was a TikTok book. And this is why I'm not, one of the many reasons why I'm not on TikTok. But Butcher and Blackbird by Bren Weaver was just a letdown to me. I read it in a night, so its pacing wasn't a problem. There was one part I liked when Butcher was wooing Blackbird, but I was not a fan of the spicy scenes. I felt that the main male character just turned into somebody else entirely, and I didn't like him. And honestly, the horror scenes were boring. I mean, I know this is a romance, but if it's going to be a mixture of romance and serial killing, which I'm not opposed to, make it better. Make it better. Finally, another one that I struggled with, but I did fall into, really was just okay for me. That's Daughters of the Nile by Zara Bari. I almost DNF'd it because it felt off, but it also felt kind of real. It was her writing style, and this was really in reference to the youngest main character. That's Nadia. And it was a little choppy. I couldn't always relate to her. She's suffering from a bad case of herpes, and the author's very descriptive about that. That is great. Like, I almost felt like I had herpes when she was describing that, and now I never want to get herpes. But anyway, there were some things that I felt that were a little abrupt in this book, but I learned some great facts about Egyptian history. I learned about Doria Shafiq, who was an Egyptian feminist, and I will be reading more about her in the near future. So on that side, plus for me. On the fiction side, I ended the book with another... I ended the month with another frustrating book, and that is The Strange Case of Jane O by Karen Thompson Walker. I wanted this to be a great book. I wanted to love it, but it was just okay for me. In fact, I was disappointed by the end. Had she given it a better ending, I would have loved this book. I felt a bit removed from the characters, though, and I think that was the writing style, the narration style. But I was willing to play along until the end, and it was just such a disappointing end. In my weekend books, which aired on Monday, I talk a little bit more in detail about this, and I actually get a little bit spoilery because there was a major omission, in my opinion, or a missed opportunity that she had with the ending, but she lost it. And anybody who lived in 2020, I feel would read this and be like, anyway. Finally, technically I finished this today, but I finally finished my audiobook listening to The Coming of the Third Reich by Richard J. Evans. 4 stars on this. Ooh, we're coming to that time of the year where when I record something late in the afternoon, the sun shines through my blinds and makes quite an effect. Anywho, very chilling. I had no choice but to listen to this. I had to pull off of it because I just wasn't getting the purse book time that I needed. But I highly recommend this book. A lot of people on Goodreads are mad because he says this is a modern version of Shirer, and they didn't like that. I'm ambivalent about that. I think both can be good reads. Anywho, that is it for me. It was a pretty prolific reading month, but overall, and I felt like it was a good month. I just didn't like every book that I read, and I guess that's okay. I'd love to hear how your reading month went for February, and do you have any March plans? I'm up in the air about what my plans are, except that this month I'm going to do each week a Women's History video, similar to what I did for Black History Month. I'll do a Women's History Month video highlighting women and in history and in writing. Anywho, that is all for me. Thank you if you stuck with me for this long. Thank you again for sticking with me on my journey. And as always, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Happy reading!